Hello Insiders, welcome to another Monday download. We're having some technical difficulties today with the video camera, so I am again on my trusty iPhone video camera. This has come in handy a few times. So let me get right to the point of what we're talking about. Actually, before I get to the point, I want to give a a Thanksgiving shout out to everyone who took some time off this weekend to be with their family and their loved ones. I know that in real estate it can be very challenging to take some time off, especially in the holidays, if you've got buyers that are trying to buy a property. I just want to commend those of you that took some time off to be with your family over the Thanksgiving weekend. Also, I have one other shout out to our team in the Alliance office. They've outdone themselves today. We've had some very close postponements, actually to the point where I think we were like 46 seconds before the auction started. The bank pulled it off, and we were very excited about that, and that was a standing record in our office for a long time. But today, they've outdone themselves because we were 20 minutes into the actual auction process. They were auctioning properties off, and this particular property was on the docket. It was down the list, and our office didn't give up even though the auction had started. The bank actually called down to the auction, pulled the property off the auction, postponed the foreclosure for us. There was an offer that came in Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, and so way to go team for not giving up. We've already got a negotiator assigned, and we are very excited to see if potentially we'll be able to get this thing approved. Go from auction block to approval by the end of the month would be super exciting. So we're all crossing our fingers on that. You can send good thoughts our direction to try and get this thing pulled together really quick. So let's get to the point of what I want to talk about in today's video, and it's buyers. And we've talked a lot about buyers over the last few months, and we're going to continue to talk about buyers. And the reason is because buyers are obviously an extremely critical part to the transaction. If you don't have a buyer, you don't have an offer, and therefore you can't negotiate a short sale. If you have an approval, but you don't have a buyer to close, then it doesn't matter that you have an approval because you're not going to close the transaction, and nobody's going to get paid. Your seller is potentially in a harmful situation because there's no one to buy their house. And so the buyer is really important. And it has become continually important as we've received feedback from banks. HSBC the other day, actually a couple weeks ago, said that over 64% of all of their pre-approved buyers never actually close. And so from a bank's perspective, and we as real estate professionals need to start gaining this perspective, a pre-approval letter means weak buyer. If all they have is a pre-approval letter, that doesn't really mean a lot. And we're going to talk in a second about how you can strengthen that, but you really need to be thinking that pre-approval does not mean this buyer can close. It simply means that they have a lender who said that they are pre-approved. What does that mean? Well, let's dig in a little bit further. Obviously, if they're a cash buyer, that's your strongest buyer possible. They can close as soon as there's an approval letter. However, cash buyers can be a little bit fickle and aren't always willing to wait around a long period of time. So there's good and bad with all buyers. Let's talk a little bit about buyers that are pre-approved and how you can strengthen them. First, I want to draw your attention to Module 4. You need to go back and re-watch this. If you haven't watched it yet because you're new to the network and you're working your way through, pay special attention to Module 4. Module 4 goes into the Sticky Buyers Part 2, the advanced strategies, and the team techniques. All of these have to do with getting buyers that are strong, holding on to buyers that are strong, and getting them ready to be able to close. For those of you who've been to live trainings and didn't invest in the DVDs at the live training, I want to highly recommend that you take some time right now and invest some money into the training because it's valuable information. And it's not just so that we can sell more DVDs, it's because you need to be able to have a reference in your educational library to some of these methods and techniques so that when you get a buyer, if you can't remember the buyer's gauntlet, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, you can go back and actually watch that section of the training so you remember how to implement the buyer's gauntlet and how it can be valuable in making sure you have a strong buyer. So invest in that. We do have some specials going right now because we've been doing so many trade shows. We discount the training at trade shows. So for those of you in the network, obviously I'm going to discount that to you if you need to work out some kind of a payment plan or pay a little bit down the road or something. I want to make it available to you, so call the office, we'll work something out. But make sure you invest in this because it really is important. All right, enough of the commercial, let's move on. All right, Buyer's Gauntlet. What is the Buyer's Gauntlet? Buyer's Gauntlet is when you put the buyer and their lender through a series of questions to make sure that they're a strong buyer that's going to be able to close. In your manual and in the training, we go through a series of questions for you to ask a lender and the why behind those questions. The next thing you need to do is actually implement it. There is a sample addendum in the training manual that you should pull out, modify, make it for yourself and for your sellers. But one of the pieces of that actually gives you authorization to speak to the buyer's lender and find out how qualified are they. You've got a pre-qualification letter. What does that really mean? And that's why banks are saying that a pre-qualification means a weak buyer, because a pre-qualification letter can mean, hey, I talked to these guys on the phone, they sound good, so they're pre-qualified based on what they told me over the phone, versus we've already sent them through an initial underwriting process and all we need are these 4 items before we go to a final underwrite and fund this transaction. That would be on the strong end. That type of a borrower you should be able to get a commitment letter from, which is going to give us a higher leverage of negotiation with the lender and a higher likelihood that we're actually going to be able to close the transaction. The other thing I want to say is after you go back through Module 4, go into the Alliance Insider Network and re-listen to, or if you haven't listened to it, you really need to listen to it, the interview we did several months ago with Aaron Tilbury. We really dug into the concept of the buyer's gauntlet and the sticky buyer, and really helped you figure out, how do I talk to these lenders? It can be intimidating. Don't let them intimidate you. Know what they're thinking and know what they need to do to get their approvals and go through their loan process. So by the time you actually get an approval letter, the buyer really only needs to make sure title's clear, bring in a few last documents to make sure nothing's changed on their financials, and get an appraisal. And that should be about it. If they're just submitting to initial underwrite at the time that an approval comes through, you're already behind the 8 ball. You've already positioned yourself to have an uphill struggle to potentially not have this buyer close within the period of time that the bank is requiring on this short sale approval. Don't put yourself in that position. Make sure you're really taking to heart all of that information and really implementing it to do the best for your seller. And that's ultimately where we come back to, because it puts your seller potentially in harm's way if a buyer can't close. If you're recommending to them as their fiduciary to pull the property off the market and accept this offer, but you haven't done any due diligence for them to know that this is a good offer, it puts your seller potentially at risk, puts you at risk for liability. So don't do that. Take the extra step, make sure they're a good buyer, and make sure they understand that they need to be able to close within 30 days of that approval letter. If they're doing the steps in the initial underwrite process and all they need to do is a final underwrite, there should be no reason why a buyer can't close in 2 to 3 weeks max. I mean, again, communicate with that buyer's lender, make sure they understand why these things need to happen, get them as part of your team through the team techniques, and make sure that these transactions close more smoothly. The other thing really quickly is make sure you're stacking offers. And we go into a whole bunch on stacking offers in Module 4, but it's basically getting more than one offer on each property, getting 1, 2, even 3 backup offers, so that if you do have a strong buyer that turns weak overnight, you've got other buyers that you can slip into place. So that's another technique that you want to use, not lose. Finally, I just want to make a kind of a side comment. It has nothing to do with what we've already been talking about, but Countrywide Home Loans will be fully integrated with Bank of America by the end of December. So the end of 2009, there will be full integration. They will be adopting a single processing. All of them will be processed together, not separate as they have been for the last year. The good news is that they're going to adopt Countrywide's processing model. That means that there's a higher likelihood that the approvals for second mortgages especially will be more realistic. Their processing of BPOs is better. Bank of America has had some really high, crazy BPOs because they use an automated system. So that should be going away according to the sources that have been giving us information. The downside, obviously, is Countrywide is a little slower, but they're not that much slower than Bank of America, so that shouldn't affect it too much. So the good should definitely outweigh the bad in this transition. Just be aware that by the end of the year, that should be fully integrated. There will be no Countrywide, and we've been kind of utilizing both up to this point. So, all right, that's all I have. Thanks, everybody. Have a great, great week. Our team, and I'm sure you are ready to just tear it up here in December, build a good foundation for 2009. We really like to gain momentum at the end of the year, which can be challenging in the holidays, but we're committed to do that. So anyway, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Don't forget we have our Wednesday strategy call on Wednesday. We'll talk to you then. Bye.